What if the secret to success wasn't just talent or hard work, but unshakable confidence? Welcome to Grasp Confidence, the podcast where visionary thought leaders, speakers, and entrepreneurs unlock the mindset and strategies for lasting success. I'm your host, Tara LaFon Gooch, CEO, two-time best-selling author, and international TEDx speaker, and I can't wait to help you step into the most powerful version of yourself. Let's dive in. What if the very traits that make you feel scattered or overwhelmed are actually your greatest professional advantage? Today, we're joined by Dr. Jennie Byrne, a board certified psychiatrist who is trained as both a physician and neuroscientist. She has spent her career helping professionals and high performers understand the brain, navigate ADHD, burnout, and mental health challenges. And I actually have the honor of being interviewed in her forthcoming book on ADHD in professionals, releasing on May 12th, 2026, which is actually my birthday. Let's dive into how to turn ADHD into a leadership strength and redefine what it means to truly thrive. Jennie, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you for having me, Tara. So good to be back.
Absolutely. Yep. And that's true. You have been here before. So, for everybody who is listening in to the first time, definitely go back, watch some older episodes. Jennie was one of them when I really first started this podcast. So, thank you for having the faith in me, even back then.
It was great.
Awesome. Well, let's talk about this because, as you know, I work with a lot of high performing entrepreneurs. And I'll be honest, I love my people, but most of them, I would say, have ADD or ADHD. So, why is that? Why are so many of these high performing people, these entrepreneurs, these leaders, why do they have ADD? Is it synonymous? Like, how does that happen?
So, a lot of people, there's this big misperception out there that ADHD means that you can't be successful as a professional, or you can't be an entrepreneur, or that you're not intelligent, or that you're not, this and this and this, because it's framed as a disorder. But in fact, that's very far from the truth. As you said, many professionals, and even more, I would say, entrepreneurs, do have ADHD, which is, in my opinion, a brain variant.
Mm.
So at least 5% of the general adult population has ADHD. And in certain professional spheres, and definitely in entrepreneurial and startup founders, which is a world I'm familiar with, the percentages are much, much higher. And why is that? The ADHD brain has certain traits which, when used correctly, can really, as you said, be an advantage, a professional advantage. So, what does that mean? A lot of folks with ADHD have extraordinary ability to connect the dots in new and unusual ways, which can look like creativity. It can look like coming up with the ideas that nobody else in the room could come up with. Sometimes they have a high amount of social sensitivity and they can be highly charismatic. They are also very sensitive to the vibrations in the room. So, as you know, for a leader, entrepreneur, that's extremely helpful when you can read the room very quickly and have an intuitive sense of what's going on. And there's something called hyperfocus, which means that the ADHD brain, when it is latched onto something that it loves, that it is passionate about, that it just goes into this flow state, which is quite intense and is actually a greater state of attention than most people can have who don't have ADHD brains. So that hyperfocus can, yeah, sometimes get you in trouble when you're supposed to be doing something else. But when you are aligned with your passions and your work is aligned with your passion, sometimes you can do more and faster and better than somebody else could.
Yes, preach it. Oh my gosh. So, right before we went on and started our recording, I was telling you that I recently reduced my schedule to I work about a 15-hour or so work week now. And I did that because I delegated certain tasks that were really draining my energy that I just could not focus on. like accounting, right? I just can't. I hate it so much. And even the thought of it, right, drains my energy. And then I would put it off, put it off, put it off. And then, of course, it's a disaster, right? So I hired that out. I hired a few other key pieces out. And I'm so like liberated right now because the things that I really, really love, I can super focus in on them, and it's hard to pull me away sometimes. So there's a lot of wisdom in there, what you just said, because I know this is true. I've seen it, I've done it in my own life that we can focus like no other if it's something that we're really zoned in on and passionate about, right?
Yeah, and I think what you did, Tara, is something when you're an entrepreneur in particular and you're running a business or there are a lot of different pieces to running a business or to doing
Yeah.
something well. And so, what you did by learning how to do it yourself and then realizing, hey, this isn't for my brain, this isn't my skill, and then finding the right person to work with you, that step by step process is highly valuable. I see some people rush to delegate before they've really grasped what they're delegating, and that can be an
Yeah.
issue. But again, for the ADHD brain, typically it is very curious and it loves to learn. So
Mhm.
sometimes you can lean into the like, I'm going to just learn the basics of accounting 101. And then soon as I understand what it is, I'm going to find the right person to work with my ADHD brain that I can delegate it to. And that's a big theme of the people I interviewed for the book was that when they're successful, especially as leaders, they have really shaped their team with precision and they have picked people to complement them and they are very thoughtful about how they build their team. And that really stood out to me with people from a variety of different kinds of roles.
Oh, I love that. Well, take us back a little bit because I think we would be remiss if we didn't say, what is ADHD? Because there's a lot of misinformation out there. And I want to hear from an expert. What is it exactly? And why do some people have it and some people don't?
There is so much misinformation out there. It's one of the big reasons I decided to write the book. Even unfortunately, physicians, doctors, therapists, a lot
Mhm.
of them don't really know much about ADHD, and sometimes they're actually giving misinformation as well, which is sad. So here's my take on ADHD. I have a chapter in the book that says ADHD is a terrible name. And I think it is a terrible name.
I
So it
agree.
stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder.
Mhm.
First of all, attention deficit. As we just discussed, people with ADHD brains, it's not that they can't pay attention, it's that they have trouble modulating it the way they want to. So sometimes it's hard to direct it to that boring accounting. But if it's directed towards your passion, it's no problem at all. And you can hyper focus and be very effective. So the idea that it's a deficit is a little bit of a misnomer. The second part of the term hyperactivity is a terrible name because, first of all, in adults, ADHD doesn't really look like bouncing off the walls typically. It looks like an internal sense of restlessness. So, if you're a professional and you have trained yourself to mask or sit very still, on the outside, you may look very calm, but on the inside, you may just be feeling terrible, like crawling out of your skin, wanting to move or you might be very fidgety or people shake their leg. So it's more of an internal sense of restlessness. And not everybody has that. There is something called ADHD inattentive type, where you really don't have that hyperactive, impulsive symptom cluster. So that's why that's a bad name. And then disorder. This is a loaded one because I
Yeah.
know there's a lot of debate out there about, should we talk about ADHD from a strength based approach or from a deficit? So, acknowledging that debate, I feel that it's very important to think of this as a brain variant as opposed to a disorder. And one of the reasons is because professionals, in particular, other high achieving people, have been told, and I heard this quote many, many times while interviewing, you're too high functioning to have ADHD. So, when we frame it as a disorder, we are saying if you're doing well, you can't have it.
Wow.
So my take on it, I like to take a strength-based approach, but I do acknowledge that there's a reason that it's a disorder, and that has to do with people getting the help they need, has to do with the way we think about mental health in the country right now. There's a long, long history I won't go into right now, but there's a long history behind why we use the disorder. So acknowledging that, I think it's more helpful to come at it from a strength-based approach.
I 100% agree. That is such a great piece of advice. And I really think that there's just so much misinformation out there that people may have it and maybe they just feel like they don't fit in. Maybe they feel like they're an outsider. Maybe they feel misunderstood just because there is so much misinformation out there and they don't feel like they belong in that hyperactivity category or that attention category. I've also heard people say that it's a dopamine deficiency. Is that true? Is that accurate?
I think people have wanted to come up with a neuroscience explanation that's very easy to understand. So
Mm.
it's a little bit of yes, it's true, but it's also really oversimplified. So, what we do know about the neuroscience of ADHD, we do know that some of the neurotransmitters or the chemicals in the brain that are most involved are norepinephrine and dopamine. Dopamine, a lot of people think about as that pleasure reward
Mhm.
chemical. We have a reward pathway. When I say pathway, I mean bunches of neurons that connect one part of the brain to the other. So we have a reward pathway. And when the reward pathway is very active, we get release of dopamine in our prefrontal cortex, which is kind of the front part of our brain. So, at its simplest, the reward pathway releases dopamine, and in ADHD, that is less active than usual. I don't love that explanation because it really focuses on chemicals in the brain as opposed to the electrophysiology of the brain, which is what I did my PhD on. And that's an understanding of the brain that we have tracks of neurons that connect different parts of the brain, and they communicate through chemicals, but also through electrical activity. And there's a lot of research showing that the electrical activity of the brain is very different for different types of brains. So ADHD has a very different connectivity and electrical activity. So I prefer to think of it more like that, but it is true that the medicines that treat ADHD typically will increase dopamine or norepinephrine in the brain.
Oh, that's interesting. Wow. So, what does somebody do, right? If they let's take an entrepreneur for example. They're an entrepreneur. We do all the things, right? You know this. We do all the things. You have to know how to do so many things, and it seems like an endless amount of tasks. What should somebody do? I want somebody that's listening to this right now that's identifying as someone with ADHD to give them a little help, to give them a little boost going into this weekend and next week of, some actionable things they could do to help their ADHD to turn it from that kind of scatteredness to a thriving state where they feel like they're excelling. What would you say somebody could do to get started on that path?
One of the things I recommend if you have an ADHD type brain is to lean into visual.
Mm.
So typically, ADHD brains do very well with visual information and connecting things in a visual way. So, one thing I recommend would be to start to make it visual. So, what does that mean? I know it always sounds a little corny to say like where do I want to be in 3 years? But there is this idea of a destination postcard that you have a visual image of like what it's going to look like when you're thriving as an entrepreneur. What is your day going to look like? When are you going to wake up? Maybe if you have an ADHD brain, you do best when you wake up at 9 a.m. That's not when other people wake up, but that doesn't mean that's not what's right for you. Maybe my perfect day is I wake up at 9 or 10 a.m. And then maybe I do best when I exercise in the morning. And then maybe I go and do some deep work in my area of passion. And then maybe I have a quick team meeting and then I'm kind of done for 3 hours. And then maybe I go, what does it look like for you? Like, what would your dream day look like if and you're working on this, Tara? Like when you wake up, what is that day? And then think about, well, what does that week look like then? If I have one day that's like this, what does my week look like? And when you start to envision what it can be like, it makes it easier to then take that giant to do list and start to maybe put them on sticky notes and put them in clusters. You could, one thing I like to do is take a lot of sticky notes. So get a lot of them, a lot.
Yeah.
Get a big wall somewhere in your house, or it doesn't really matter where. Just get a big wall or a big board somewhere and just start writing all those to dos on sticky notes. And then as you're dreaming about your best day, your best week, what does it look like when your business is going the way you want? You can cluster those sticky notes and you can find themes. So you can kind of say, well, these sticky notes all kind of have to do with finances and math and accounting. And I don't really, if you were saying you don't really like that, like I'm going to cluster those things together. Or these are the things that have to do with learning. I love learning. When I get to learn something new, I'm so excited. Well, on my to do list is learn how to use an AI chat bot for the business, or learn how to hire a new person, or whatever it is. And you can start to cluster those things together. And then I feel like when you start to visualize it, it makes it a lot
Mhm.
easier. And as an entrepreneur, when you're just starting a new business, I've been an entrepreneur a couple times over. When you're just starting a business, you do have to learn everything, right? Just a little bit. And so leaning into your natural curiosity and desire to learn just enough to know whether it's something your brain is good at or not. So
I
if you
like
learn
that.
just a little bit of accounting, one weekend maybe you sit down and you watch a couple hours of videos on accounting.
Mhm.
And you're like, you know what? This is not for me. My brain is not going to be happy doing this. Then the next question is like, okay, well, what is the most effective way for me to delegate this in the most cost efficient way? So the
Mm.
decisions become easier when you think about like, is my brain going to thrive doing this thing? It becomes a lot easier to decide, do I need help? How much should I spend on something? Because if your brain is really terrible at it and it's really important for your business, you might need to invest. But if it's something you
Absolutely.
love, even if everybody says to you, "Oh, you're the boss of the business, Jenny, you don't need to be fiddling around with AI." Well, I love to fiddle around. So maybe that is the best use of my time. So I know I'm kind of being a little vague here, but I think making it really visual and just thinking about you and your body and your brain and what does your perfect day look like, even if it has nothing to do with anybody else's perfect day. Because once you
I
really know what works for you, you can start to build things. And that's what's wonderful about being an entrepreneur is that you do have the opportunity to shape your days. Whereas if you're just in corporate America, you might not really have that opportunity.
which is why we like being entrepreneurs, right? And I just love this, and I tell my clients all the time, when they feel overwhelmed, when they feel like they have a million things to do, I ask them a very simple question, "Have you written it down?" Right? And most of the time, they haven't written it down. So all of these things are just in their brain, and it's like it's marinating, right? And it gets to a point where they feel exacerbated, they feel overwhelmed. I always tell people, write it down. And then when you have accomplished something, mark it off. Relax a little bit, right? Sit back, enjoy that and then go to the next one. And before the day is over, my personal rule is I try to get as much done in a day as possible without hurrying. If I feel like I have to hurry or be busy, or that's when it gets sloppy, and that's when I don't like the delivered product of whatever it is, right? So I do as much as I can without feeling like I have to hurry. If I feel like I have to hurry, I stop and it's the end of it. And I close my tabs in my brain before I go to sleep at night, because I used to have this issue where I would again think about all of the things that I needed to do, but it wasn't written down and it would overwhelm me. So I write it down and then take account of what needs to be done the next day, and I do it. And I have found that has helped me so much in just the mental organization and overall peace that I feel during the day. And it really helps me focus on the right things. What do you think about that? Is that a good approach?
Well, first of all, if it's working for you, it's a good approach because everybody is a little different. I
Mhm.
like the fact that you write it down. I do feel that, again, making things visual
Yes.
and in our digital world, we rarely write things
Yep.
on a piece of paper, but there is something about connecting our brain to our hand and writing that is
Mhm.
different than typing. And I do like that you do that. I think for people who may have a lot of things on their to-do list, but also a lot of emotional content. So this is a big feature
Mm.
of ADHD we don't talk about much is the trouble with emotional regulation and
Ooh,
sensitivity.
it's
But
interesting.
so I have one person I'm working with right now who's a professional, and I've recommended to him. He actually is pretty good. He's got a lot of people to help him, and so he's delegated a lot of tasks, but he still struggles to fall asleep at night, and he still struggles with a lot of thoughts. So one of the things that he's been working on is just free form. I call it a brain dump. Like you just pick up the pen and you just write whatever is in your head. It doesn't matter if it's like what the food I just ate or how you could write the same thing. You could say, I don't know what to write, and just write that over and over again for 3 pages. And so my recommendation to him is a 3 page brain dump. And you just write. You just write and you just write and write and write and write. That gets a little bit, I think, some of the emotional junk out of
Mhm.
the brain. Sometimes it's less the to-do list and more of the emotional junk that's making it hard for people to sleep. So that would be my only tweak if somebody listening, it's more of a emotional than a to-do list. Maybe just the free form writing for them might help.
Okay. You mentioned emotional regulation. What can you talk to us about that? Because that really did not connect the dots until you said that. And it's so true. So is it a nervous system thing? Is it emotional regulate? Like, what is that? Talk to us about that.
Yeah, the way I like to think about it is the ADHD brain is very emotionally reactive.
Mm.
So people who have more of the hyperactive impulsive symptoms in particular have a lot of this, where their emotions react very strongly and very quickly. And it can go in both directions. So something good happens, they're just, on top of the world, they feel amazing. And then 5 minutes later, something bad happens and they're just like, this is the worst day I've ever had. So they're very sensitive to emotions that are very strong. They're also very sensitive, as I mentioned, to picking up social emotional cues from the room.
Yeah.
They may not really be
Mhm.
aware that's what's happening, but they're like picking up on the cues. Some ADHD brains have sensory sensitivity in general, which is why it can be so distracted. So I had someone tell me, for example, when he was a kid in the classroom, every time someone walked down the hall, he just heard the shoes click, 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 click. And he couldn't pay attention in class because he just hear these clicking shoes, which of course nobody else in the room was paying any attention to. So there can be this sensitivity to different kinds of stimuli. But the emotional regulation, the way I like to think about it is the frontal part of our brain, again, up here, which is normally the part we kind of use to control our emotions when it's not a good time to be emotional. That pathway doesn't work the same. And it's a lot harder to calm the emotions down. And so, high achieving professionals, what typically happens is they go to work, they hold it together, they use all of their resources to be emotionally regulated at work. And then they come home and things are a mess and they really feel dysregulated. And I've talked to a lot of women professionals in particular where there is this expectation they come home after work and do a second job, taking care of the family or the house, and they really fall apart. And this can sometimes lead to misdiagnosis. So a lot of folks have been diagnosed with bipolar 2 disorder or borderline personality disorder when in fact it's just ADHD. So it's kind of this dirty secret, and I'm not sure why it's not talked about more, but that's often the more impairing part of ADHD is when you aren't aware that you're emotionally dysregulated and you don't know what to do.
Wow, that is so mind-blowing. I mean, I can't even imagine somebody gets diagnosed with bipolar disorder and they actually have ADHD. Are you kidding me?
I have a young woman I've been working with for about 6 months, very sad story, very highly intelligent, went to one of the most competitive colleges, has ADHD in the family. It's very genetic, but
Yeah.
nobody thought about it for her because she was so smart. And she kind of fell apart and she got loaded up with a ton of medicines, high dose lithium, all sorts of meds.
Ooh.
She was in the hospital twice. This is a very lovely, very intelligent young woman. And she came to me and I was like, I don't think you have bipolar disorder. And then she said, oh, yeah, my mom has ADHD. And I was like, oh, let's get you assessed. And it took her a couple months to be willing to do the assessment. She was so
Yeah.
like, it can't be, it can't be. And lo and behold, we did the assessment and the testing, and she was quite clearly, with an ADHD brain. And now she's getting treated correctly, and we're getting her off all of that stuff. But it's been a long and painful road for her. So that
Wow.
happens a lot.
You never hear about it. I've never heard about it. Like, this blows my mind. And,
Mhm.
when you and I were talking as you were interviewing me for your book, which I'm very grateful, by the way. Thank you. When we were talking, you kind of asked me, when did I get diagnosed and this type of thing. And I told you that I believe I was around 9 years old. I got diagnosed and the shame I felt, right? I felt so much shame. That's what I remember. I remember just feeling like I wasn't worthy, feeling like there was something wrong with me, feeling like I wasn't good enough, feeling like I was not smart. And I feel like a lot of people feel that way, and it's really a shame. But I will say this, now that I'm an adult, now that I'm an entrepreneur, I have tuned it into a superpower. But for people that have been misdiagnosed with something else and they're getting diagnosed now with ADHD, they're not ashamed. They are happy, I bet. They are elated. They feel seen in a way, and liberated, I'm sure. These clients you're talking about, I'm sure they feel for the first time that somebody has actually seen them and not labeled them. What do you think about that?
I mean, this one young woman, that's basically what she
Yeah.
said. She said, I've had a lot of
Wow.
doctors, I've had a lot of people, just I didn't feel like they were really seeing me. It's interesting because I remember when we did the interview and you were saying how for you when you were young was such a stigmatizing experience. And I've heard both. I've heard people, well, when I interviewed for the book, I heard people like you who felt this shame and stigma. I heard people who thought it was great to be diagnosed as a kid because they got a lot of resources and they learned early on how to cope with their brain.
Mhm.
And then I had one person I interviewed who said he got diagnosed, but his parents decided they didn't want to tell him. And so he actually late in life came back and got a diagnosis and told his parents, "Hey, mom and dad, I have to tell you I got this." And they just laughed and they're like, "Oh yeah, we knew that when you were like 6.
Why
We
didn't
had a
you tell me
diagnosis." And he was like, why didn't you tell me?" And they're like, "We didn't feel like we needed to. We just
Wow.
took that information and kind of used it to
Mhm.
provide you with what you needed without having to give you a label." So I've seen
Yeah.
like all the variants of it. And um, I do believe my point of view is that even if you don't want to take medicine, even if you don't want to get treatment, I do think it's helpful to understand how your brain works. So, full disclosure, I do not have ADHD. I have a kid who is a neurodivergent kid, whose brain works differently than mine. And it created a lot of difficulties in our household because I didn't understand how their brain was working. And so we went through the process of getting a diagnosis, and once I did that, it was like, "Oh, now I understand. I understand how your brain is working. It's not like mine, but now I know what to do. Now I know how to support you. Now I know how to talk to you. Now I know where we're going to have trouble communicating. So I do believe for everybody, whatever kind of brain you have, it's really helpful just to know. And when you're living with other people or you're in a relationship or in a work relationship, knowing how that other person functions is really helpful, even if it's not a disorder, even if there's no medicine or just understanding each other, even if we don't have ADHD, like
Yeah.
um that just makes work so much better for everybody.
I love that. Oh my gosh. So much wisdom here. What would you say is something that, again, somebody's really resonating with this? Maybe they've gotten diagnosed, maybe they haven't. Maybe they just think, okay, maybe this is, I've heard it talked about a lot. Would you say the first step is somebody just getting tested just so they know a baseline of where they are and how to start?
I think that's a great first step. A lot of people, because of the shame or stigma or whatever history baggage, aren't ready for that. So if you're listening right now and you're not ready for that step, I would say the key is to get good information.
Mm.
So I have an ADHD resource list that I've been compiling. It's on my website. We can put the link for that into
Mhm.
the show, but just start, read a book. If reading is hard for you, which for a lot of ADHD folks, reading a book is hard, listen to the audio book or just look at a clip. But one of the books I really like as a primer is Driven to Distraction, which is not such a new book by Dr. Hallowell and Ratty. I really like that. So get some good information. I think if you're not ready to take the step to get assessed, if you are ready to get assessed, I have to be honest, it is a little tricky. Um, the traditional way to get assessed is to do neuropsychological testing, which can take a couple hours. I don't know how, care if you remember when you were a kid. That's the traditional way to do it.
Mhm.
My practice is a little different. I use a computer test of attention plus some standardized rating scales. So there are some docs out there now doing more computer testing. It is a little tricky sometimes to find somebody good, but I definitely, if you're looking for help, you should look for somebody who has ADHD expertise, or you could start with an ADHD coach. If you find a good coach, they probably have good docs and therapists in their network that they could refer you to. So that's another way to start that may be more comfortable for a lot of people, like start with a coach.
Mm.
Sometimes that can feel a little bit less clinical or a little less overwhelming. And then the coach should typically have some good resources, but make sure the coach is also specialized in ADHD.
Do you only work with professionals in North Carolina, or what area do you serve? Because I'm sure people are gonna say, "I wanna work with Jenny."
Well, I'd love to work with you. I can coach anywhere. So coaching is not a medical license, so you can do that anywhere.
Mhm.
For the assessment piece, I do need a medical license in your state. So again, on my website, there's a map of all of my active states. I think I'm up to 20.
Oh,
So I cover a
amazing.
lot. I cover the West Coast, the East Coast, and some of the Midwest. So just you'd have to go look at my map to see if your state is covered. But regardless, you can always reach out to me from the website and I can help direct you if I can't help for some reason. I can probably direct you to somebody who can.
Work with Jennie Byrne. That's all I have to say. She's the best. Don't work with anybody that's not the best. Work with the best. Um, Such a fountain of knowledge. I really appreciate you being on the show today and just helping us understand that it's not a deficiency like they put the label on. And it really and I feel like that's part of the shame I had when I was a kid. You hear the word deficit and you automatically think that means you're deficient. And it's not. You can use this and leverage this as a superpower, and it really is. I mean, I've seen it in my own life and I've seen it with my clients when they really hone in. So, thank you for that and for giving a voice to us and for allowing me to be a part of your book and share my story with your audience. So, work with Jenny, everybody. She's amazing. And it's so great that you're licensed in 20 states and you can coach anywhere. So go to your website. What's your website so people can find you?
Constellation PLLC is the website.
Love it. Wonderful. Jenny, thank you so much for being a guest again on Grasp Confidence Podcast. And thank you for everyone who tuned into this episode. Send me a message. Let me know how this episode helped you in your life, in your profession, in your career, because we know ADHD is a superpower and you can go from that confused, disorganized state to thriving if you are seen, heard, and understand how to leverage it. Thank you so much for being a guest on the show, and we will catch you on the next episode. Take care.